What's up, what's up, what's up? How's everybody doing? Welcome to another math video for all you rock stars out there. And this time we are going to learn about two consecutive square roots. Pretty challenging topic, but if you have an understanding of square roots and you have done some work to kind of memorize some of your perfect squares, life becomes a little easier, which is kind of a hint on some things you might want to do moving forward. Here's an idea for you to think about as we get going. What would you do? What would you do? I know what I would do. What would you do if you were trapped on an iceberg? Just chill. You would chill because it's ice. It's an iceberg. You would just literally be chilling. I know, that was funny. You're welcome. That one was free. Okay, today what we're going to work on is estimating and identifying the two consecutive natural numbers between which the square root of a number lies, and then justify which natural number is the better approximation. Okay, so that's a lot of mumbo jumbo words in there that may not make a lot of sense. Let's just make sure we understand a couple kind of vocab or math concepts mixed in there with it. When we see the word, when we see the word natural numbers, just a reminder, natural numbers are just your counting numbers. You don't count zero. You just talk about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. As far as you can count. That's what natural numbers means. It's just your counting numbers. And then when we talk about square root is talking about, it's the symbol that looks like this and has a number inside. What's the square root of 16? It's simply asking you what number times itself equals 16. Well, 4 times 4 equals 16. So the square root of 16 is 4. Okay. And when we get into talking about the better approximation, we'll explain when we're trying to figure out which two whole number square roots or natural number square roots it's between, which one's it closer to? What's the better guess? Okay, which leads us to our first vocabulary word for this lesson and only vocabulary word for this lesson. Over the years, I've learned when I teach this, sometimes kids don't really understand what consecutive means. And so for this one, if we go back real quick, we see that the goal is to figure out, identify the two consecutive natural numbers which the square root of a number lies. Okay, so what does that word consecutive mean? It's a number that follows each other in order without gaps. So there's no decimals involved. It's consecutive. It's just, if I said 7 and asked you what the next consecutive number would be, you'd say 8. It's the next number in line. Or you could list a series of numbers like our example, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Those are all consecutive because they're counting in order. Okay, let's review real quick. Square root. What's the square root? When you see that symbol, this is the way I read it. I say, what is the square root of 100? And when you say that, you're basically saying, what is the number I can multiply by itself to equal 100? Well, that would be 10, right? Because 10 times 10 is 100. So 10 is our answer. This one says, what is the opposite of the square root of 100? Well, we know the square root of 100 is 10. What's the opposite of 10? Well, it's the negative. You can say, what's the negative version of the square root of 10? And if we go down here and just finish that pattern, what's the square root of 64? 8. 8 times 8 is 64. What's the opposite of the square root of 64? Well, that equals negative 8. Okay, just a review, understanding. I think most of us knew square roots. I just want to make sure you understand if that number is on the outside, it means the opposite of whatever the square root of the number on the inside is, which means the negative version of that number. Okay, next up. So what is the opposite of the square root of 196? Now, at the beginning, I told you this will be very useful if you have a memorization of your square roots or your perfect squares. In other words, if you know what 1 times 1 all the way up to 20 times 20, life will be a lot easier, okay? But if you don't, there are still ways to figure that out. So for this, in this instance, when we see the square root of 196, what we should be thinking about is, what is the square root? What are the numbers that could multiply together to equal 196, okay? Well, that last digit is the key. So when you see a 6 at the end, we have to figure out what numbers, when multiplied together, could end in a 6. And when you think about 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 4 is 16. Right? So that ends in a 6. 5 times 5 is 25. 6 times 6 is 36. So 6 times 6 ends in a 6. 7 times 7 is 49. 8 times 8 is 64. And 9 times 9 is 81. So now we know that our answer has to, the square root of 196 has to be a number that ends in 4 or ends in 6. Well, let's try. We know 4 times 4 is 16, so that's not 196. So what's the next number that ends in 4? Well, it's 14. And what is 14 times 14? Well, 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 1 is 4 plus 1 is 5. Go ahead and give yourself that magic 0. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 1 is 1. And when you add those up, you are going to get 196. And that's the number we're looking for. So the square root of 196 is 16. And we want the opposite version of it, so it's negative 16. You see how that works? Let's try another one. So now that you understand like the perfect square, sometimes they don't equal a perfect square. And so that's what we're trying to do right now is figure out which one of these is what two consecutive numbers would a square root of 24 fit in. And so we could even look at a number line when we're doing this. I'm going to put this here just for the future and say, okay, well, let's do our perfect squares that give us these square roots. So what is 1 times 1? That's 1. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put 1 here, 2 here, 3 here, 4 here, 5 here, 6 here. Okay, we could go on forever and ever, but let's just see what we think here. So 1 times 1 is 1. What's 2 times 2? That's 4. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 4 is 16. So we're getting closer to 24. Remember, we're trying to get to 24. 5 times 5 is 25. So 5 times 5, so the square root of 25 would be right here. And we said the square root of 16 is 4, because 4 times 4 is 16 would be right here. Well, where would that lie? Well, it would lie somewhere on that number line, and it would be between those two numbers, right? Because between those two numbers, square root of 24 is smaller than the square root of 25, so it would be somewhere in this gap. So our answer is between 4 and 5. Now, remember I told you to give me a better approximation on which number it would be closer to? Well, where do you think it would be closer to? Square root of 24 would be closer to the square root of 25 or the square root of 16? Yeah, you're right. It would probably be somewhere right in here. Okay? Probably somewhere right in here. It could be closer to the 25. Let's look about this one. The opposite, remember we read that? The opposite or the negative version of the square root of 152 falls between which two consecutive numbers? Okay, so now we're playing with bigger numbers, and it makes it, the only reason it's a little bit harder is because we're trying to figure out where it's going to go with numbers that aren't super easy to multiply by. So I'm going to go ahead and do another number line down here, and I challenge you to go ahead and do this from time to time when you're dealing with these. And I'm just going to look at my values here, and I'm going to make my number line based on those values. Now, again, we see that at the top. You see that negative in front of the 152. So we know our answer is going to be a negative number. So I already know that it's not going to be these two. Okay? So now I got 11, 12, 13, and 15. So I'm going to go ahead and put some marks here so that I can work with. And I know this is a very ugly number line, but my smallest one is going to be negative 11. And when we're dealing with negative numbers, remember, we go the opposite direction, which means this negative 12, negative 13, negative 14, negative 15. Because those are the only answers it can be. That's the only answers it gave us. So now we got to go back to this square root of 152. And we got to figure out which numbers it would fall between. Well, let's look at the numbers they give us. If you have these memorized, it's a lot easier, but I don't think all of us do. What is the square root of 11? I'm sorry, what is 11 squared? 11 times 11 is 121. So this would be the square root of 121, the opposite of the square root of 121. What's 12 squared? Well, that would be 144. So this one would be the opposite of the square root of 144 equals 12. And what's 13? Well, I could write this up here, 13 times 13, and you guys could solve it. But 13 times 13 is 169. So this is the opposite of the square root of 169. Okay? Now, I think we've gone far enough because our square root of 152 is between 144 and 159. So it's somewhere in between the negative 12 and the negative 13. Okay? And so it would be, you would circle this one and you would circle this one. And if I had to ask you which one it's closer to, you would have to figure out, is the negative 152 closer to 100? I'm sorry. Is it closer to the, did I just do, no, I did it right. Okay. It's closer to 169 or is it closer to 144? Okay, and so I know that 152 is 17 away from here, and it's 8 away from here, so my chances are it's going to be somewhere in here. Hope that helpful. Same thing. Between which two consecutive numbers does negative, or the opposite, of the square root of 52 lie? Okay, so we can look at the numbers right off the bat, and if you have a strong understanding of this, you might just say right off the bat, which one of my squares is close to 42? And right off the bat, some of you would say 49. All right, because you know 49 is a perfect square. If you know 49 is a perfect square, 7 times 7 is 49. Okay, and then you say, okay, so it's not 7, and we're going negative, so what's the next consecutive number after 7? And that would be 8. And what would 8 times 8 equal? Well, that'd be 64. So negative 52 is between negative 49 and negative 6. Remember, we're doing the opposite. So it's going to be between the 7 and the 8, the negative 7 and the negative 8. Starting to make sense now? Hope so. Let's do one more. And this is a bigger number. So the square root of 172 falls between which two consecutive numbers? Now, we don't have a negative sign, so these are going to be positive values. Okay? And so we go look at our numbers, and we know that 12 squared, it's one of those ones that I think most of us memorize, is 144. In a previous slide, we said that 13 squared was 169. So we're real close. 169 is real close. So I'm imagining 16 is going to be one of those. So just to make, I'm sorry, I'm imagining 13 is going to be one of those, because 13 is 169. It gets us right below it. So what is 14 times 14? Well, let's check it out. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 0. 1 times 14 is 14, equals 196. So 13 and 14. And what is it closer to? Well, 172 is real close to 169. It's only 3 away, and 172 from here is what, 24 away. So it's probably closer to the 13. All right, perfect squares and square roots. They go together, and trying to find out the consecutive one, you're starting to see how we use the square root of non-perfect squares, and those will always end up giving us big decimals. Like the square root of 26 is going to be 5 points something. It's going to be an irrational number. So hope you guys learned a lot from this. And I hope you're going to come back and see us again when we rock out as rock stars working on our next concept. All right. How does a tree draw a person? He makes a stick figure. Duh. See y'all. Have a good one.